In the world of paranormal romance, you hear stories about fated meets. They tell tales of a wolf shifter love story that conquers all. My story isn't one of them. My story is a werewolf romance gone wrong before it even had a chance to begin. I'm not looking for my mate. I'm not hoping for a savior. I'm just trying to survive the one man who should have protected me. The one man who hates me more than anyone in the world. My father. Alpha Greg Mulgrew. Him, I am not a daughter. I am a curse, an outcast, the one she was rejected. Chapter 1, The Bloodmoon Outcast. Ice cold water jolted me from a restless sleep. A gasp, sputtering as the freezing shock hit my thin nightshirt and soaked the straw mattress beneath me. Get up, filth. I flinched, curling into a ball as a boot connected sharply with my ribs. I'm up! I'm up! My stepsister Maxine loomed over me, the empty bucket still in her hand. Her blonde hair was in perfect, shining curls even at this early hour, and her blue eyes, my father's eyes, sparkled with the same familiar cruelty. She was the Bloodmoon Pack's princess, and I was its trash. Today is the most important day of my life, she sneered, kicking my mattress again for good measure. The alpha of the Shadowclaw pack arrives this afternoon. I will not have you in all your pathetic filth embarrassing me. You will clean the hall out, you will serve the guests, and you will stay out of sight. I will, I whispered, scrambling to my knees, my head bowed low. Look at me when I'm speaking to you. My blood ran colder than the water she'd thrown on me. Slowly, I lifted my head. I didn't dare meet her eyes, instead staring at the rough wooden floor of the attic I called my room. Your hat, she spat. Where is it? Put it on. No one wants to see that. With a shaky hand, I reached for the one thing I owned that offered any protection, a worn gray wool beanie. I tugged it down low, covering my hair and shadowing my face. I didn't need a mirror to know what she was talking about. My secrets. The first was my hair. Where Maxine's was the color of golden sunlight, mine was a cascade of pure, unnatural silver. The second, and the far worst crime, were my eyes. Not blue like my father's, or warm brown like the woman I'd only seen in a single cracked photograph. My eyes were violet. According to my father, they were the mark of the curse that had killed my mother. The reason he lost his fated mate. The reason I was an outcast. My inner wolf Dawn whimpered in my mind. She's been a faint whisper for years, starved and beaten to silence just like the rest of me. Hurry, Eve, before he comes. Get out, Maxine snapped. And try not to stink up the place. You have 1 hour to make the hall perfect before my father inspects it. She turned and descended the attic ladder, her footsteps echoing with authority I would never have. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My ribs ached. I knew they'd be purple by noon, a perfect match for my eyes. Pushing the wet, tangled silver strands under the cap, I tugged it down to my eyebrows. I pulled on my patched-up servant's tunic and threadbare leggings, not even bothering to dry off. The cold was a familiar companion. I was Eve Mulgrew, and this was my life. A broken-down body, a silent wolf, and a future that held nothing but more of the same. All those stories about a destined mate finding you, what a joke. That was a fantasy romance for girls who were allowed to dream. I was the girl who was lucky to see the next sunrise. I was the rejected mate before I'd even been found. I crept down the ladder into the main house, my bare feet silent on the polished wood floors. The Bloodmoon pack house was already buzzing with energy. Omegas rushed back and forth with platters of food and armfuls of fresh linens. Everyone was terrified. A visit from a leader like Alpha Rafe of the Shadowclaw pack was an alliance-level event. He was known as the most ruthless, most powerful alpha werewolf on the continent. A true alpha male romance hero for someone like Maxine. A boogeyman for someone like me. My father wanted this alliance. He wanted to marry Maxine off to Rafe to join our packs and double his power. My stomach twisted. If Maxine, already a tyrant, became Luna to a man like that, my life, which I didn't think could get any worse, would become a living hell. My job was to serve breakfast and then disappear into the cleaning. I slipped into the great hall, my eyes glued to the floor. Head down, heart silent, I muttered to myself. It was the only prayer I knew.
I grabbed the heavy pitcher of coffee and began to move around the tables, refilling the mugs of the ranked warriors. I was a ghost, a shadow. As long as I was invisible, I was safe. You. The single word, a low, guttural growl, stopped me dead. The entire hall went silent. The clinking of silverware, the murmurs of conversation, all of it vanished. I didn't have to look. I knew that voice. It was the sound of my darkest nightmares. Slowly, I turned. Alpha Greg Mulgrew sat at the head table, his massive shoulders rigid, his gaze locked on me. He was a terrifying man, all muscle and rage, but to me, his most terrifying feature were his eyes, the same cold blue eyes as Maxine. "What did I tell you about serving my warriors?" he snarled. I was just, my voice was a useless croak. "You were what?" He stood up, and the chair scraped back with a sound like a scream. "Run," Dawn whispered, a tiny panic spark in my head. But I was frozen. To run was to be caught, and to be caught was to be punished worse. "Answer me, girl." He crossed the hall in 3 long strides. I cringed, my shoulder hunching up as I prepared for the blow. I squeezed my eyes shut. Crack! The sound wasn't a slap. He'd backhanded the heavy silver pitcher from my hands. It clattered to the floor, hot coffee splashing across my feet and the stone. I cried out, stumbling back from the scalding burn. "You are a distraction," he hissed, grabbing me by the front of my tunic and lifting me onto my toes. His face was inches from mine. I could smell the rage rolling off of him, a toxic, burning scent. "You are weak, an embarrassment." "I'm sorry, Alpha," I choked out, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm sorry." "You are the reason she's gone," he whispered, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet rage. The whole pack was watching. This was his favorite show. "My mate, my Luna. You killed her."
It was a mate betrayal I'd heard 1,000 times. He didn't just blame me. He despised me for it. He saw my silver hair and violet eyes as a blight, a sign that my mother had been weak, that their bond was somehow flawed. I was the living proof of his pack's greatest tragedy. I was his cursed mate's cursed child. "I'm sorry," I sobbed. "Get out." He shoved me so hard I flew backward, sprawling onto the slick coffee-covered floor. My hip cracked against the stone, sending a jolt of pure agony up my spine. From the head table, I heard Maxine laugh. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the burns, ignoring the pain, ignoring the humiliation. I just ran. I didn't stop until I was in the kitchens, my back pressed against the door, my entire body shaking so hard I could barely stand. The pack cook, an older woman named Connie, gave me a look that was half pity, half annoyance. "Get 'em up, child, and then get to the cellars. We need more wine for the Alpha's arrival." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. For the rest of the morning, I worked until my bones ached and my burns blistered. I cleaned up my own meth in the great hall under the scornful eyes of the pack. I hauled crates of wine from the cellar. I scrubbed floors until my hands were raw. All the while, the whispers followed me. "Alpha Rafe will be here by sunset. I heard he's looking for his Luna. Maxine is the perfect choice. He's a true protective alpha. He'd kill anyone who disrespected his mate." A bitter, hysterical laugh almost escaped me. A protective alpha? What must that be like? My alpha, my father, was the one I needed protection from. A new, colder fear crept in. If Alpha Greg was so desperate to impress Alpha Rafe, what would he do with me? A living, breathing stain on his reputation. A dark thought, one I'd had before, slithered into my mind. What if he decided I was too much of an embarrassment to keep? A stray toy to be broken? I finished my work and fled back to the only place I was safe, my attic. I sank onto my damp mattress, cold seeping into my bones, a perfect match for the cold in my heart. I pulled off my warm boots and looked at my feet, red and blistering from the coffee. Tugging off my hat, I let my silver hair tumble over my shoulders. I pulled a small, sharp shard of a broken mirror from its hiding place under my mattress. I stared at my reflection, at the girl she was rejected. The violet eyes, the silver hair, the mark of the curse. Tonight, the most powerful alpha in the land would be under this roof. My father would be fawning over him, parading Maxine in front of him. I would be a ghost. I would be nothing. My only hope was to be so invisible, so quiet, that he would never even know I existed. I was Eve, the Bloodmoon outcast, the unclaimed mate that nobody in the world would ever want, and I just had to survive one more night. Chapter 2, Alpha Werewolf's Arrival. I didn't get to hide in the attic for long. Fist pounded on the attic door, the sound echoing in the cramped space. Eve, get down here. The alpha will be here in hours and you're hiding? Get down here or I'll tell your father. It was Connie, the head cook. Her voice was sharp with a panic that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the man who was coming.
I scrambled down the ladder, my hat pulled low. The pack house had transformed. What was a low buzz of energy this morning was now a full-blown, barely contained frenzy. Omegas were running, not walking, their faces pale and strained. Warriors who normally lounged around were polishing armor and standing stiffly by doorways. The air was thick with scent of beer, lemon polish, and roasting meat. My father was the source of the terror. He was everywhere, stalking the halls like a caged lion, roaring at anyone who was a second too slow or who missed a single speck of dust. He was desperate to make a good impression, and his desperation made him volatile. "You," Connie snapped, shoving a heavy bucket of lye soap and a stiff brush into my hands. "The front steps. I want them clean enough for the goddess to eat off of. And if I see one streak," she didn't need to finish. I hurried to the main entrance, my knees already aching in protest. I knelt on the cold stone and began to scrub. My head down, my world reduced to the scrape, scrape, scrape of the brush. I was invisible, just as I wanted to be. Being invisible made me the perfect audience for the whispers. Two of the younger Omegas, Amy and Rachel, were frantically polishing the already gleaming oak doors, their voices low and terrified. "They say his pack is just called Shadowclaw because they move like shadows. No warning. They just appear. I heard he's a normal alpha werewolf," Amy whispered back, casting a nervous glance over her shoulder. "That he's different. Older. That he took the pack by force when he was just 18 and killed his own father for it. He's a true alpha werewolf," Rachel breathed, the words a mix of terror and awe. "I heard he tore out the throat of the Silver Creek Alpha just for looking at his betas and shit. A true protective alpha," Amy mused, but she shivered. "I hate to be his enemy." I scrubbed harder, the lye biting into the raw skin of my hands. A protective alpha. An alpha who fought for his pack, for his mate. The concept was so foreign it felt like a different language. My father was alpha. He was the one who broke my nose last month for dropping a plate. He was the one who whipped my back for speaking out of turn. This wasn't some fantasy bromance. This wasn't a wolf shifter love story where some handsome stranger would write in and save the day. This was a brutal political meeting of two dangerous predators, and I was just the mouse hoping not to get stepped on. "Eve!" My head snapped up. Magathine was standing on the top step, tapping her foot impatiently. She was wearing a deep crimson-red dress that clung to her curves. Her golden hair swept up in an intricate style. She looked like a queen. "My room now," she commanded. I dropped the brush, my heart sinking. A summons from Maxine was never good. I scurried after her, my wet rag and clothes dripping on the polished floors. She'd soon be walking on.
Her room was a stark contrast to my attic. A fire crackled in the hearth, and at least 10 different gowns were laid out on her massive bed. She was giddy, her cheeks flushed with excitement, already playing out the perfect alpha male romance in her head. "This is it, Eve," she said, twirling in front of a full-length mirror. "This is the day my life begins. He'll see me and he'll know I'll be Luna of the 2 most powerful packs in the world." She didn't want me for an opinion. She wanted me for a task. "My silver locket," she snapped, pointing to her jewelry box. "The one my father gave me. Find it, and be quick. Your pathetic tripping is ruining my rug." I hurried to her vanity, my hands shaking as I fumbled through sparkling, expensive jewels. My hands were red and raw from the lye, covered in grime. I felt like a troll touching a princess's treasure. He's not just any alpha, you know. He's a king among wolves. He has no mate. No one has ever been good enough for him. She shot me a venomous look in the mirror. He requires perfection, purity, strength. Something you wouldn't understand. I found the locket and held it out to her, my eyes on the floor. She snatched it from my hand. "Ugh, your hands are disgusting. You're disgusting." She looked at me, her perfect face curling in disgust. "Father is right to keep you hidden, especially today. If Alpha Raph even saw you, he'd probably think our whole bloodline was weak. Tainted, cursed. The one she was rejected. He'd probably challenge my father for his territory just for the insult of having something like you under his roof, she added, her voice laced with casual cruelty. A cold dread, deeper than the freezing water from the morning, settled in my stomach. She was right. I wasn't just an embarrassment. I was a liability, a weakness in my father's armor. Now get out, she said, giving me a shove toward the door. Go back to the kitchen and try not to be seen. I don't want the smell of the attic clinging to me when my alpha arrives. My alpha. She was so sure. I fled. I spent the last hour in the suffocating heat of the kitchen, helping Connie and the other servants plate hundreds of tiny, intricate appetizers. My only job was to be a pair of hands. Silent. Head down. Then we heard it. A single, deep, booming blast from the sentry horn on the wall. He's here, Connie breathed, and a tray of delicate pastry slipped from her hands, shattering on the floor. Clean it, she shrieked, at me, her voice cracking with panic. My father's roar echoed through the entire pack house. Positions! Now! If a single thing is out of place, I will have your hides. I scrambled to clean the mess, my hands covered in cream and pastry shards, just as one of the pack's guards, Oscar, burst into the kitchen. You, he barked, at me. The alpha is at the door. We need all hands. Get to the entry hall. You will stand by the back wall, and you will not move, you will not speak, you will not breathe. Understood? But my father, I stammered. He didn't want me seen.
Your father wants all servants present to show respect in numbers. Now move. He grabbed my arm and dragged me out of the kitchen. My heart was a drum against my ribs. No, I'm not supposed to be here. He'll see me. He'll see me. I was still streaked with grime. My hands were bleeding, and I smelled of lye and sweet cream. We were shoved into a line against the back wall of the great hall, just as the massive front doors swung open. A gust of cold autumn air swept in, making the banners on the walls ripple. Alpha Greg stood at the front, Maxine glowing at his side. He was smiling, a wide, false smile that didn't reach his eyes. The Shadowclaw warriors entered first. They were not like our warriors, who wore their status with boasts and loud laughter. They were silent. They moved with a lethal grace, their dark gray and black uniforms practical and unadorned. They were all scarred. Their eyes were cold, and they didn't look at the food, the hall, or the founding pack members. They scanned the room. They scanned the exits. They scanned for threats. My father's smile tightened. Even he was intimidated. Then he entered. The world went quiet. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. The air thickened, charged with a power so immense it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. Alpha Rafe. He was taller than any man I had ever seen. With shoulders so broad, he seemed to fill the doorway all by himself. His hair was as black as a raven's wing, and unlike my father, he wasn't smiling. He wasn't doing anything. He just stood on the threshold, his presence sucking all the air and light from the hall. He wore a simple black tunic and pants, no armor, no jewels, but he looked more powerful than a king in full regalia. He was the very definition of an alpha werewolf, and my wolf, Dawn, who had been silent all day, suddenly jolted in my mind. A sharp, painful pang of something. Not just fear. It was something else, something I couldn't name. Alpha Rafe, my father boomed, striding forward with his hand outstretched. Welcome to Bloodmoon. We are honored. Alpha Rafe's gaze moved from my father to Maxine. He gave her an assessing, cold glance that made her preen. But he didn't smile. He didn't take my father's hand. He just walked past him into the center of the hall. His eyes, which I could now see were a startling ice blue, swept the room. It was a slow, possessive, and absolute assessment of his surroundings. He was a predator, and this was his new hunting ground. I shrank back, trying to make myself smaller, hiding behind the servant next to me. I tugged my hat down further, convinced that his gaze landed on me. I would simply die on the spot. His gaze passed over my section. It was like a physical touch, a brush of ice and static. I held my breath, my heart threatening to burst from my chest.
He didn't stop. His eyes didn't linger. He didn't see me. He turned back to my father, Alpha Greg. he said, and his voice was not a boom like my father's. It was a low, deep rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. Let us begin. Chapter 3. The Unclaimed Daughter's Duty. The welcoming feast was a mockery. The great hall was transformed. Golden streamers hung from the rafters, and the long, rough-hewn tables were covered in white linens and silver platters piled high with food I was never allowed to touch. Musicians played in the corner, but the melody was strained, fighting against the suffocating tension in the room. This wasn't a party. It was a performance, and I was the stagehand, hidden in the wings. My duty, the only duty this pack had ever given me, was to be a shadow. Alpha Greg had made it clear. I was to help the kitchen staff, clear empty plates and goblets from the tables, and under no circumstances was I to be seen or heard. I was a ghost at my own family's feast. This was the unclaimed daughter's duty. I moved along the edges of the hall, my hat pulled so low it all but blinded me, my eyes fixed on the floor. I collected plates, my movements quick and silent. The smells of roasted pig, spiced wine, and sweet cakes filled the air, making my empty stomach ache with a familiar, dull pain. My wolf, Dawn, was a tight, painful knot in my chest. Ever since Alpha Wraith had walked into the hall, she had been agitated, pacing the edges of my mind with a low, anxious whine. "Danger," she whispered. "He is danger." "I know," I whispered back, ducking behind a pillar to avoid a passing warrior. "Just stay quiet. We just have to survive the night." But it was more than just fear. It was a strange, restless energy, an itch under my skin I couldn't explain. I ignored it, focusing on the task at hand. Stay invisible, stay alive. From my place in the shadows, I could see the high table. My father, Alpha Greg, was in the center, his face flushed, a false booming laugh echoing too loudly in the hall. He was trying to play the part of the warm, confident host, but I could see the rigid line of his shoulders, the way his hand gripped his wine goblet until his knuckles were white. He was terrified. On his right was Maxine. She was a vision in her crimson dress, her golden hair glowing in the candlelight. She leaned toward Alpha Wraith, her laugh light and practiced, her hand finding any excuse to rest on his arm. She was playing her part to perfection, the beautiful, attainable prize. And then there was him, Alpha Wraith with a black hole in the center of all the light and color. He sat in his simple black tunic, untouched by the fake merriment. He did not laugh. He barely spoke. He watched. When Maxine spoke to him, he would incline his head, his ice blue eyes polite, but utterly empty. He was not drinking the wine, I noticed, only water. He was in complete, terrifying control, and he was not in any way interested in my stepsister. The sight of it sent a tiny, dangerous flicker of satisfaction through me, which I immediately crushed. His rejection of her wasn't good for me. It would only make her cruel, and it would make my father furious. A furious father and a cruel stepsister always meant more pain for me. I slipped back toward the kitchens, my arms piled high with dirty platters. I was almost to the door when I backed straight into a solid, unmoving wall of muscle. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I looked up. It was one of the Shadowclaw warriors, the same one who had given me a look of contempt at the door. He was scarred from his temple to his jaw, and his eyes were chips of dark, cold stone. He looked down at me, at my filthy servant's tunic, my stained apron and the grime on my hands. His lip curled in disgust. "Watch where you're going, little rat," he growled, his voice low and menacing. I flinched as if he'd struck me. Little rat. It was the same name Maxine used. I felt a hot, stinging shame. I'm sorry, sir, I stammered, my eyes darting to the floor. He just grunted, shoving past me so hard my shoulder slammed into the doorframe. I winced, biting my lip to keep from crying out, and fled into the chaos of the kitchen. "Where have you been?" Connie shrieked, her face red from the heat of the ovens. "The high table is out of wine, and you," she jabbed finger at me, "are the only one small and quiet enough to get in and out without being noticed. Take it, and do not drop it." She shoved a heavy, ornate silver decanter into my hands. My heart stopped. Go to the high table? The place I had avoided all night? The place where he was? "No, please, I can't," I whispered, my hands shaking. "My father. Your father will have my head if his guest's cup runs dry. Do you want to be the one to tell him we failed? Go, now." My blood turned to ice. She was right. Disobeying a direct order was a death sentence. My legs felt like lead as I pushed through the kitchen doors. The hall seemed louder now, the music more frantic. Every step I took toward that table felt like walking to my own execution. Head down, hat low, be invisible, be a shadow. The prayer repeated over and over in my mind. I kept my eyes on the floor, navigating by the legs of chairs and the hems of dresses. I could feel the power radiating from the high table. A physical heat. I made it. I was standing just behind Maxine, my arm outstretched, my hand shaking so violently I was sure I'd spill wine on her. My father was in the middle of a loud, boisterous story, and that's when I told him the Bloodmoon pack does not yield. "A fine story, Alpha Greg," a deep, rumbling voice replied. Alpha Rape's voice. It vibrated through my bones, and dawn scrambled in my mind. A sudden sharp jolt of panic and recognition. I poured the wine into my father's goblet, my hand trembling. "More for our guest?" my father boomed. "No, water is all I require." "Nonsense," my father laughed. "This is a celebration. Girl, pour the Alpha some wine." I froze. My orders were to fill my father's cup, but now he was speaking to me. He had acknowledged my existence in front of him. "Yes, Alpha," I whispered. I reached for Rape's goblet. I said no. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the entire hall. The music faltered. My father's smile vanished. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. "What is this?" The voice wasn't his. It was Maxine's. It was cold and sharp and full of a night's worth of frustrated spite. I didn't move. I just stood there trapped, my arm still half extended, the heavy decanter in my hand. "Eve, is that you under that disgusting hat?" I could feel every eye in the hall land on me. My father's face was turning a deep, dangerous purple. He was furious, not at Maxine for making a scene, but at me for existing, for being seen. I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Look at me," she commanded. I couldn't. I just shook my head, my eyes squeezed shut. "Please, please, just let me disappear." "She's my father's little pet project," Maxine said, her voice dripping with venom for the entire hall to hear. She was on her feet now, her red dress like a flag of war. She was angry at Ray's rejection, and she was taking it out on me. "She's unwell, broken, cursed. Filth." "Maxine, that is enough," my father growled, but there was no force in it. He was embarrassed. "I just wanted to make sure she wasn't bothering our guest. She has a habit of distracting, don't you, Eve?" She took a step toward me, and then she did it. With a flick of her wisp, she reached out and ripped the hat from my head. It happened so fast I didn't have time to react. The warm, comforting wool was gone. The cold air of the hall hit my scalp, and my hair, my long, impossibly silver hat, tumbled down over my shoulders, cascading over my filthy tunic like liquid moonlight. The entire hall gasped. Someone screamed. "What is the meaning of this?" my father roared, finally on his feet. "Look at her!" Maxine shrieked, pointing at me as if I were a monster. "She dares to show her curse at this feast, her disrespect." I was paralyzed, my hand still holding the decanter, my body shaking uncontrollably. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. I wanted to die. I finally dared to look up, my tear-filled gaze meeting my father's murderous one. But his eyes weren't the ones I saw. My gaze slid past him, past a shocked and triumphant Maxine, and I locked eyes with Alpha Rafe. He was standing now, too. He wasn't looking at my father or Maxine or my hair. His ice blue eyes were locked on my eyes. The violet eyes I kept hidden. The entire world
The noise, the music, the gas, it all faded to a deafening roar in my ears. He wasn't looking at me with disgust like the warrior, or hatred like my father, or even cold indifference like he did with Maxine. He was staring at me with a look of raw, primal, and terrifying shock. His nostrils flared, and a low, almost inaudible sound rumbled in his chest. My duty was to be invisible, and I had just become the center of everything. Chapter 4. A scent of forbidden love. Time didn't just slow. It stopped. A heavy silver decanter slipped from my numb fingers, crashing to the stone floor with a sound that seemed to echo for an eternity. Red wine splattered across the stone, staining the hem of my tunic like blood. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was trapped in the impossible ice blue gaze of Alpha Rafe. My silver hair was a curtain around my shoulders, my violet eyes exposed to the entire world. I felt naked, flayed open, every gasp, every whispered abomination and cursed from the surrounding pack members was a fresh cut. My father's face was a mask of pure, murderous rage. Maxine's was a portrait of triumphant spite. But Alpha Rafe, he was not disgusted. He was not angry. He was stunned. I watched, paralyzed, as his nostrils flared once, twice. He was scenting me. His head tilted just slightly, as if he were listening to a sound only he could hear. The low rumble I'd heard before returned, deeper now, vibrating from his chest. It wasn't a growl of anger. It was a sound of confusion, of discovery. My own wolf, Dawn, who had been a terrified whimper, suddenly shoved against the inside of my mind. It was the strongest I had ever felt her. She wasn't scared. She was electrified. An agonizing, terrifying thrill shot through my veins. A jolt of energy that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with him. The air around him seemed to change. From across the room, I was hit by a scent I had never encountered. It wasn't the stale ale and sweat of my pack's warriors. It was a smell of a storm breaking over a dark forest of ozone and wet earth and something ancient and wild. It was the most terrifying and intoxicating scent I had ever known. It was his scent. And my body, my traitorous body, leaned into it. This was a nightmare. This was forbidden love in its most twisted form. He was an alpha king, a guest, a potential ally for my father, and I was a servant, a little rat. A cursed thing from the attic. For me to even breathe his air was a crime. For my wolf to, whatever this was, it was a death sentence. See? She shrieked, her voice shattering the frozen moment. The hall burst back into terrible, sharp focus. She's an insult, an omen. Father, punish her. Show Alpha Rave how we deal with such disrespect. My father roared, his face purple. You abomination! He took a step toward me, his hand raised. I cringed, my arms flying up to cover my face, preparing for the blow that would surely break my jaw. This was it. He would kill me, here, in front of everyone. You dare to show your cursed face at this hall, to insult my guest? He bellowed, his voice cracking with his fury. I told you to be invisible. I didn't. Please, Alpha, I'm sorry. Sorry? He laughed, a short, barking, terrifying sound. You will be more than sorry. You will be an example. He turned to his guards. Seize her. Take her to the dungeons. She will be publicly flogged for this. 2 guards, men I had served coffee to this morning, started to move toward me. Their faces were grim. This was not a rescue. This was the end. I looked frantically around, my gaze landing, begging on the one person who could stop this. My father just stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. Then I looked at Alpha Rafe. He hadn't moved. His gaze hadn't left me. He was watching the scene unfold, his face an unreadable mask of stone. He was watching them come for me. He was watching me, the little rat, about to be dragged to the dungeons. He was watching me, about to be flogged in front of everyone.
Of course he wouldn't intervene. As Maxine said, I was an insult to him. He was probably waiting for my father to clean up the mess. The first guard grabbed my arm. His grip was like a steel trap, his fingers digging into my bicep, bruising the bone. I screamed.
and the world exploded. Chapter 5. Mine. The alpha fated mate. It wasn't a sound. It was a shock wave, a growl so deep, so guttural, so utterly predatory that it shook the stone floor beneath my feet. The wine goblets on the tables rattled. The music died. The guards froze. It didn't come from my father. It came from Alpha Wraith. 1 second, he was at the high table. The next, he was in the middle of the hall, a black-clad blur of speed and fury. He was standing between me and the guards, his back to me, his body a living shield. The guard who held my arm was still attached to me, his eyes wide with terror, his knuckles white. Rafe didn't even look at him. His ice-blue eyes were locked on my father. "Let her go," he commanded. His voice was no longer a rumble. It was the sharp, deadly crack of a glacier breaking apart. Father, for the first time in his life, looked stunned into silence. "Alpha Rafe, this is a pack matter, a disgrace. It does not concern you." "I said," Rafe repeated, taking one slow, deliberate step towards my father, "let her go." He still hadn't looked at the guard. He didn't need to. The man's hand flew from my arm as if he'd been burned. He scrambled backwards, falling over his own feet to get away. I was free. I was trapped. I was standing in the eye of the storm, my arm throbbing, my entire body shaking so hard I could barely stand. "What is the meaning of this?" My father finally choked out, his authority crumbling. "She is nothing." "She is not nothing," he said, his voice dropping to a low, possessive snarl that vibrated in my very bones. He turned, slowly. The entire hall held its breath. He turned away from my father, from Maxine, from the entire world, and faced me. All the rage, all the killing intent that had been rolling off him vanished. His face was still hard, but his ice-blue eyes, were burning with an intensity that had nothing to do with anger. It was raw. It was possessive. It was pained. He took a step towards me. I flinched, stumbling back. "No, oh, please, I didn't mean to. I'm sorry." "Do not," he whispered, his rough voice, "ever apologize for what you are." He was so close now. He lifted a hand, and I cringed, expecting to be struck. But he didn't hit me. His fingers, large and calloused, brushed against my cheek. He was impossibly gentle. His touch was warm, a stark contrast to the ice in his eyes. He gently, almost reverently, hooked a finger under my chin and tilted my head up, forcing me to look at him. I was looking into the eyes of the most powerful predator on the continent, and I was not dead. "Your hair," he whispered, his other hand lifting to touch a strand of the silver mess. "And your eyes." A single tear slipped free and ran down my cheek. He brushed it away with his thumb. Dawn was screaming in my head. A single, joyous, terrifying word. "Mate. Mate. Mate." It couldn't be. This wasn't real. This was a fantasy romance hallucination brought on by terror and starvation. This was a cruel joke.
"Alpha Wraith." Maxine's voice was a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "What are you doing? She's cursed. She's built." Alpha Wraith's gaze snapped from me to her. The cold fury returned, magnified by 100. "She is not cursed," he snarled. He took his hand from my face and in one swift, possessive movement wrapped his arm around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. I gasped, my head spinning. I was surrounded by him, his scent, his warmth, his power. It was overwhelming. I felt like I was drowning. He held me there, a shield and a cage, and faced the entire stunned hall. His chin rested just above my head, his claim unmistakable. "I have been searching for my entire adult life," he announced, his voice booming with an alpha's final, absolute authority. I began to believe the moon goddess had forsaken me, that I was destined to be incomplete. He looked down at me, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. I was wrong. Looked back at my father, whose face was a sickly pale white. "This is not a curse," Alpha Rave declared, his voice ringing with a power that left no room for argument. "This is a blessing. You have kept my mate hidden in your attic." The word hit the room like a thunderclap. "Mate." Maxine let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. My father's face contorted, shifting from shock to a deep, dark, territorial fury.
She, Alpha Ray finished, his voice dropping to a deadly, evasive growl that echoed in the silence, is my fated mate. She is mine. Chapter 6. A Father's Mate Betrayal. The word hung in the air, electric and impossible. Mate. My mind, which had been a whirlwind of pure terror, went utterly blank. All I could feel was the solid, warm wall of his chest against my back. His arm was a band of steel around my waist, holding me up, staking his claim. Dawn, my wolf, was no longer a whisper. She was screaming in my head, a joyous, frantic, agonizing cry of him, it's him. This couldn't be real. This was a dream, a cruel, vivid hallucination. I was the outcast, the curse, the little rat. And this was the most powerful alpha werewolf on the continent. This kind of thing didn't happen to me. This was the stuff of a fantasy romance, and my life was a horror story. No, a voice choked out. It was Maxine. Her perfect, beautiful face was a twisted mask of ugly disbelief. Her eyes were wide, her hands clenched into claws at her sides. She lunged, not at him, but at me. You witch, you've enchanted him. She never got close. Alpha Rave didn't even look at her. He just released his hold on my waist, grabbed my hand, and pulled me behind him, using his body as a shield. He raised his free hand, and a wave of power, pure, suffocating, alpha authority rolled off him, stopping Maxine in her tracks as if she'd hit a glass wall. She stumbled back, gasping, her face pale. "Do not," he snarled, his voice a low, lethal promise, "touch my mate." He said it again, "My mate. This is an outrage." My father, I flinched. My eyes snapped to him. The shock on his face was gone, replaced with a deep, mottled, purple rage. His eyes were bulging, his massive fist clenched. He was looking at me, but it was a look I'd never seen before.
It wasn't just hatred. It was horror. He was horrified that I, his worthless, cursed daughter, could be fated to this, to him. He was horrified that I, the one he had rejected his entire life, had just been claimed by an alpha king. It was the ultimate humiliation for him. And I knew in that gut-wrenching second he would never, ever allow it. "She is not your mate," he roared, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is a curse, an abomination. She is nothing." "She is my fated mate," Rave stated, his voice calm and cold as a razor's edge. "And you will show her respect." "Respect?" My father let out a barking, unhinged laugh. The sound sent a shiver of pure terror down my spine. This was the laugh that always came before the beatings. "You want respect for this? This thing that killed my mate? This stain on my bloodline?" He took a step forward, his eyes locked on me. "I will not allow it. This alliance is over. This insult will not stand." Alpha Rave's warriors, who had been silent shadows, instantly moved. They fanned out behind him, their hands on their weapons, their faces hard. The Bloodmoon warriors tensed, mirroring them. The air crackled, thick with the promise of blood. "Father, no!" Maxine cried, her earlier rage now replaced with panic as she saw her future crumbling. "Be silent, girl!" he roared. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at Wraith. He was looking only at me, his face a mask of such profound hatred it stole the air from my lungs. "You will reject him," my father commanded, his voice deadly quiet. "Eve, look at me. Reject this bond or I will tear your worthless throat out myself." I couldn't breathe. Reject him? I looked from my father's murderous face to the solid, powerful back of the alpha who claimed me. Dawn was weeping in my mind. No, we can't. I couldn't form words. I was frozen, trapped between the monster of my past and a future so impossible I couldn't grasp it. My silence was my answer. "You defy me?" My father whispered. "You choose this stranger over your alpha, your father?" He laughed again, the sound cracking. "So be it. If I can't have an alliance, I will have your life."
He lunged. It was so fast. He shoved past Rafe, who was turning, caught off guard by the sheer insanity of the move. My father wasn't attacking the other alpha. He was attacking me. His claws, long, black, and sharp as daggers, were extended. His eyes were red with his bloodlust. I saw it all in slow motion. Rafe's roar of rage, Maxine's scream. My father's face twisted in a mask of triumph as his hand flew toward my chest. He was going to kill me, right here, in front of my fated mate. I had nowhere to run.
Chapter 7. Cursed Mate's Power. Time stopped. My father's claws were inches from my heart. I could see the glint of the candlelight on their razor-sharp edges. I could smell the stale ale on his breath as he roared in triumph. Alpha Rafe was moving, a black blue of fury, but he was a half-second too late. My father was closer.
This was the end. After 18 years of surviving, of hiding, of praying for an escape, I was going to die on the floor of the Great Hall, murdered by my own father. No, the word was not a thought. It was not a whisper from dawn. It was a physical, primal force that erupted from the deepest part of my soul. It was the combined terror and rage of a lifetime of abuse. It was the desperate, final cry of a wolf who had just found her mate, only to have him ripped away. I will not die, I screamed. But it wasn't a scream that came out. It was light, a blinding, deafening explosion of pure violet and silver power blasted out from my body. It was not a wave of heat, but a wave of cold, like the absolute zero of deep space. It was the light of a distant, impossible moon. The force of the blast hit my father square in the chest. His triumphant roar turned into a shocked, gurgling cry. The power lifted him off his feet, his massive body suddenly weightless, and threw him backward. He flew across the hall like a broken doll, smashing through the high table, scattering food and wine, and slammed into the stone wall with a sickening crunch. He didn't get up. He just slid to the floor in a heap of splintered wood and unconsciousness. The shock wave didn't stop with him. It rolled outward, hitting the guards who had been lunging for me, sending them flying. It knocked Maxine off her feet. The crystal goblets on every cable shattered simultaneously. The heavy velvet banners ripped from the walls. The air itself seemed to tear, filled with the scent of ozone and something ancient, something floral. And then silence. The hall was destroyed. The pack members were cowering, flattened against the walls, staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I stood in the center of it all, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. My entire body was vibrating, humming like a plugged string. I felt empty and full. I looked down at my hands. They were glowing. A soft, pulsating violet light was pouring from my palms. My silver hair was floating around my head, defying gravity, each strand crackling with a faint static energy. What did I do? This wasn't a curse. A curse was a mark, a bad omen. This was power. From across the room, a groan. My father was moving, but he wasn't looking at Rafe. He was staring at me, his face pale with a new, different kind of terror. Witch! He gurgled, blood trickling from his mouth. Demon! Abomination! The pack members began to whisper. Their fear turned to a new panicked hatred. They weren't just disgusted by me anymore. They were afraid of me. My curse was a lie. The thing that they'd bullied me for, beaten me for, it was this. This was my heritage. This was the curse my mother had given me. This was the lie that turned the idea of cursed mates on its head. I had saved myself. And in doing so, I had just signed my own death warrant. They would tear me apart for this. I backed away, my glowing hands held up. No, I didn't mean to. Do not move. The voice was Alpha Race. I spun around. He was standing exactly where he had been. Untouched, the wave of energy had passed around him, as if it knew not to harm him. He was staring at me, but there was no fear in his eyes. There was no disgust.
His ice blue eyes were burning with an intensity that stopped my heart. He was looking at me, at my floating hair, at my glowing hands, with an expression of raw, absolute awe. A slow, dangerous, and possessive smile spread across his face. He ignored my father. He ignored the powering pack. He took one slow step toward me, and then another. I flinched, holding up my glowing hands. "Stay back, please! I don't know what this is. I can't control it." "I know,"
he said, his voice a low, soothing rumble. He didn't stop walking. It's magnificent. He reached me in 2 more strides. I was trembling, terrified of what I'd done, terrified of what he would do. He didn't grab me. He didn't hurt me. He reached out and, his face a mask of pure wonder, gently took one of my glowing hands in his. He held it, turning it over, watching the violet light play across his own callous, scarred skin. He wasn't burned. He wasn't harmed. He just held me. "They told me you were worthless," he whispered, his ice blue gaze lifting to meet my violet. "They told me you were a curse." He raised my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my glowing palm. The gesture was so tender, so unexpected, it shattered my terror and left me breathless. They lied. He let go of my hand and the glow slowly began to fade. My hair settled back onto my shoulders. The energy receded, leaving me so exhausted I swayed on my feet. He caught me before I could fall, his arm wrapping around my waist, pulling me securely against his side. He turned, facing the wrecked hall and my groaning, beaten father. "My mate and I are leaving. And if a single one of you dares to follow, I will burn this entire pack to the ground." Chapter 8, marked by the protective alpha. My father's defeat echoed in the ringing silence. The pack was frozen, their faces a mixture of terror at my power and disbelief at their alpha's humiliation. Rafe's arm was a band of steel around my waist, the only thing holding me upright. The energy that had exploded from me was gone, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion so profound my knees were buckling. "My mate and I are leaving," he stated, with his voice ringing with iron. "And if a single one of you dares to follow, I will burn this entire pack to the ground." From the floor, a choked, wet growl, "You cannot take her." My father was pushing himself up on one elbow. His face was pale, his lips split and bleeding, but his eyes were full of a fresh, desperate wave of hatred. He spat. He is Bloodmoon. She is my blood, my property. I will see her dead before I see her with you." He was trying to rally. He was trying to turn his pack's fear of me into a weapon. Alpha Rafe didn't even look at him. He looked at his own warriors, who were now formed into a solid line, a wall of muscle between us and the pack. "Prepare to move," he commanded. Then he looked down at me. His ice blue eyes were intense, focused, and all business. The awe was gone, replaced with a grim urgency.
"Eve," he said, his voice low and urgent, for my ears only. "He means it. The moment I am gone, he will kill you. Do you understand?" I nodded, my whole body shaking. I knew it. My one act of self-defense had signed my death warrant. "I am making this claim," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "Here, now. It will bind us. It will seal the bond, and it will protect you. It is the only way to get you out of here alive. It will hurt." My heart hammered. He was giving me a choice. After a lifetime of having none. "Do I have your permission?" I looked past him at my father, who was now being helped to his feet by 2 of his warriors. His eyes met mine, and he smiled. A slow, bloody, terrifying smile that promised an agonizing death. I looked back at Rafe, this terrifying stranger, this powerful alpha, my meat. Dawn was screaming yes in my head. My own voice was barely a whisper. Yes. He didn't hesitate. His expression softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened with resolve. His hand, impossibly gentle for such a warrior, came up to my face. He cupped my jaw, his thumb stroking my cheek once. Then his other hand moved to the back of my head, tangling in my silver hair, and he tilted my head to the side, baring the column of my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing myself. "No!" My father's final desperate roar echoed across the hall. "I reject this bond! His words were cut off as Rafe's mouth descended on my neck. It was not a kiss. For 1 second, there was just the shocking, intimate heat of his lips against my skin. And then his fangs sunk in. A sharp, searing, white-hot agony exploded from that single point, radiating through my entire body. It was a pain so intense, so all-consuming, it stole the breath from my lungs. A scream tore from my throat, and my hand flew up, my fingers digging into the hard muscle of his shoulders. I was being torn apart. I was being claimed. But just as the pain reached a peak I thought would shatter me, it changed. It became a jolt of pure energy, like liquid lightning pouring from him into me. It was his power, his essence, his very soul flooding my senses. It pushed back the exhaustion, it quieted the fear, and it met the new fragile magic inside me, wrapping around it, shielding it. I felt him, his strength, his possessiveness, and it was unmistakable, his overwhelming, profound relief. Dawn, my wolf, howled in triumph in my mind, a joyous, soaring cry, as she finally met his wolf. The bond, which had been a thin, terrified thread, slammed into place, becoming a cable of solid steel. He pulled back. I gasped, my legs giving out completely. He caught me, his grip on my waist sure and strong. The world was spinning. My neck was on fire, a deep, throbbing ache. But it was a good ache. It was a brand. Alpha Rafe raised his head and glared at my father over the top of my head. His lips were stained with a single drop of my blood. "She is marked," he snarled, his voice now a true alpha's command, layered with the power of his pack. "She is my Luna. She is Shadowclaw. Touch her, speak her name, or even think of her again, and you declare war on my entire territory." My father just stared, his face a mask of utter, absolute defeat. He had lost. He had lost his daughter, his alliance, and his pride.
Rafe didn't wait for a reply. In one fluid, powerful motion, he bent and scooped me up into his arms, bridal style. I was too weak, too shocked, too overwhelmed to do anything but cling to his shoulders as he settled me against his hard chest. "We're leaving," he commanded his warriors, and with me in his arms, he turned his back on my father, on my sister, and on the only life I had ever known. He walked out of the ruined Great Hall, his warriors forming a perfect silent perimeter around us. And he didn't look back. Chapter 9. The Shadowclaw Wolf Shifter's Prize. The cold night air was the first thing that shocked me back to reality. It hit my face, sharp and biting after the suffocating heat of the hall. Alpha Rafe was moving, and he wasn't just walking, he was running, covering the ground with an impossibly fast, fluid, and silent predator's lope. His arms were locked around me, holding me securely against his chest as if I weighed nothing. I heard shouts erupt from the pack house behind us, my father's roar of pure, impotent rage. But no one followed. Race warriors were dark ghosts flanking us, their weapons drawn, their senses on high alert. No one was stupid enough to challenge them. I was pressed so tightly against him, I could hear his heart, a strong, steady thump, thump, thump beneath my ear. He wasn't even breathing hard. My neck was a blazing inferno, the throb of the mark, a constant pulsing reminder of what had just happened. The bond was a living thing, a new strange humming wire inside my mind, connecting me to the terrifying stranger who was currently abducting me. Because this wasn't abduction. This wasn't a rescue. This wasn't a wolf shifter love story. I had traded one prison for another. I'd escaped a monster I knew, only to be captured by a different kind of monster. An alpha king. A ruthless warrior who had started a war for me. Dawn, my wolf, was a traitor. She was purring in my head. A low, happy, contented rumble. "Safe. Meat. Ours. Safe. He's a stranger," I shrieked at her in my mind. "He's kidnapping us." She just purred louder. We reached the line of dark, imposing vehicles, hidden among the trees, all black and gleaming in the moonlight. They looked more like armored trucks than cars. His warriors piled into them with silent, practiced efficiency. Rafe didn't put me down. He opened the back door of the largest SUV himself and slid into the plush leather seat, settling me on the bench beside him. He pulled the heavy door shut, and the world was suddenly, shockingly silent. The shouts from the pack house were gone. The cold wind was gone. It was just Me and him. The engine started with a low, deep rumble, and the vehicle pulled away, its tires crunching on the gravel path. I scrambled, pushing myself as far against the door as I could get, my heart jackhammering. He was so big. He filled the entire space. His presence, his scent of storm and forest was overwhelming. He wasn't looking at me. He was on a sleek black satellite phone. His voice was calm, low, and utterly ruthless. Beta Kalen, the alliance is broken. Alpha Greg is hostile. I have my mate. We are en route. Lock down the borders. I want a war footing by sunrise. My blood ran cold. War. A real war. He had said it so calmly. Because of me. He ended the call, and the silence in the car became a heavy, suffocating blanket. The only sound was the engine and my own frantic, shallow breathing. I stared at my hands in my lap, my glowing hands from before, now just pale and streaked with grime. He finally turned his head. His ice blue eyes pinned me in the darkness of the cab. I couldn't read his expression. It was blank, unreadable. "You are safe," he said. His voice was a deep rumble that I felt in my chest. "Safe?" I whispered, my voice cracking. The words sounded like a lie. You bit me. You started a war. You took me." "I took what is mine," he stated. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. It was a simple, unassailable fact. A cold, bitter realization settled in my stomach. I was his. I had a new master. I had gone from being my father's property to his. The Alpha's rejected daughter had just become the Shadowclaw wolf shifter's prize. I looked at him. This powerful, dangerous stranger who now owned me, body and soul, all because of a bite. "Where are you taking me?" I finally managed to ask, my voice small. He watched me for a long, heavy moment, his gaze unwavering. "Home." The word didn't sound like a promise. It didn't sound like a sanctuary. It sounded like a new, stronger, and far more beautiful cage. I turned away from him, pressing my face against the cold glass of the window, and watched the dark, unfamiliar trees fly by. For the first time since my father had killed my childhood hope, I wept. I wept for the prison I'd lost and for the one I was terrified I had just found. Chapter 10. The start of a moonlit romance. The drive was endless. I must have fallen into a state of shock or maybe a light, exhausted doze, because when the vehicle finally slowed, I jolted awake, my heart pounding. My first panicked instinct was to look for him. Alpha Rafe was exactly as he had been, a silent, stone-like presence in the darkness beside me. He was staring out the window, his jaw set, his expression unreadable as we passed through what looked like a massive, fortified gate. My pack house, the Bloodmoon Hall, was a large, chaotic, aging wooden structure. This was a fortress. It was carved into the side of a mountain, a breathtaking, terrifying structure of dark stone and smoked glass that seemed to blend an ancient castle with modern, brutalist military design. Guards were everywhere. They weren't the lazy, beer-bellied warriors from my pack. They were silent, alert, and clad in the same practical, dark gray and black uniforms as Rafe's warriors. They moved with an efficiency that made my blood run cold. This was a machine, and he was his master. As the USV pulled to a stop before an enormous set of black iron doors, the guards didn't just move, they snapped to attention. They didn't stare at me with disgust or open curiosity. They just bowed their heads when he exited. Their respect for him was so absolute, it was a palpable force. The cold night air hit me, and I shivered, my thin, wine-stained tunic offering no protection. Rafe opened my door. For a second, I just stared at his outstretched hand, terrified to take it. He didn't rush me. He just waited, his patience a new, unnerving kind of threat.
I flinched as I put my bare foot, I'd lost my shoes at some point, on the cold paving stone. I tried to stand, but the moment I put weight on my legs, they crumpled. The magic I'd unleashed, the terror, the shock, it had all added up. I was utterly spent. I didn't hit the ground. He caught me, sweeping me up into his arms again with an ease that was as frightening as it was secure. I was too weak to protest, too weak to do anything but bury my face in the hard warmth of his shoulder, my body trembling uncontrollably. I was a captive, a prize, his property. He carried me through the iron doors into a hall that was nothing like the one I'd left. There were no drunken shouts, no gaudy streamers. It was vast, quiet, and clean. The floors were polished black stone, and the air smelled of him, that scent of storm and pine and something else, clean stone and old, powerful magic. He didn't speak. He just carried me up a wide, winding staircase, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous space. We passed warriors who nodded respectfully and servants who bowed their heads and vanished. No one stared. No one sneered. It was the most terrifying, disorienting experience of my life. He finally stopped and pushed open a heavy wooden door. He didn't carry me to a dungeon or a cell or even his own chambers. He set me down gently on my feet in the middle of the most beautiful room I had ever seen. It was huge, with a fireplace, a soft-looking rug, and a bed that was bigger than my entire attic room. But I didn't see any of that. My gaze was drawn to the far wall. It was made entirely of glass, a massive window that looked out over a moon-drenched valley. The full moon was high, bathing the room in a pale, silvery light. I stumbled toward it, my hands pressed against the cool glass. The moonlight. It was the same light I'd felt inside me, the same power. Dawn, my wolf, was silent, but I could feel her, a quiet, awe-struck presence, gazing at the moon as if it were a long-lost mother. A moonlit romance. The title was a cruel joke. This wasn't romance. This was a gilded cage with a beautiful view. You're in pain. His voice, a low rumble, snapped me from my trance. I flinched, spinning around. I'd forgotten he was there. I instinctively brought my hand up to my throat, to the source of the fire. The mark. He was standing by the door, watching me, not with hunger or lust or anger, an unreadable, assessing intensity. I'm curse, whispered, my voice raw. My father. He's right. I'm a monster. You saw what I did. I saw what you are. He corrected, his voice quiet. You are not a monster, Eve. You are magnificent, and you are untrained. He took a step toward me, and I flinched back against the glass. The mark, he said, his voice softening just a fraction. It burns. The first night is always the worst. He walked, not toward me, but into an adjoining room. I heard the sound of a faucet, and he returned a moment later. He was holding a clean white cloth and a small dark green jar. He stopped a few feet from me. He didn't loom. He just waited. May I? He asked. I stared at him, my mind reeling. The Alpha King, the ruthless warrior who had just stolen me and started a war, was asking me for permission?
I was too shocked to speak. I just gave a tiny, jerky nod. Clothed the distance between us. He was so tall, and the air around him crackled with his power. I had to tilt my head back to look at him, my heart rabbiting against my ribs. I was terrified he would hurt me, that this was a trick. But his movements were slow, deliberate. He gently, so gently, used one hand to push my silver hair back from my shoulder. His calloused warrior's fingers brushed my skin, and a jolt, the electric hum of the bond, shot straight down my spine. This will help, he whispered. His other hand, the one with the cloth, came up. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for a rough, painful scrub. It never came. His touch was tender. He dabbed the cool, damp cloth on the inflamed skin around the mark, his touch impossibly light. Then he opened the jar.
The scent of herbs and mint filled the air. He dipped 2 fingers into the salves, and looking me straight in the eyes, he slowly, carefully applied the cool balm to the 2 deep punctures on my neck. I gasped. The relief was immediate, a blessed, cooling wave that extinguished the fire. But it was his touch. His rough, battle-scarred fingers were so gentle, so careful. It was a contradiction that shattered my reality. My father, my family, had only ever touched me with fists and claws. This stranger, this enemy, this protective alpha who had claimed me, his was the first kind touch I had ever known. A tear I didn't know I was holding slipped free and ran down my cheek. He didn't mock me. He didn't call me weak. He just caught the tear with his thumb, his expression unreadable in the moonlight. "I do not let what is mine suffer, Eve," he said, his voice a low, possessive rumble. "Ever." He stepped back, giving me space, and the loss of his heat was a sudden, unwelcome chill. "There are clothes in the closet. A meal will be brought to you. Rest. No one will harm you here. You have my word." He looked at me for one long, unreadable moment. He was a possessive alpha, a dominant warrior, but he wasn't forcing me. He was giving me the one thing I had never, ever had. A choice. A safe room, a moment to breathe. He turned and walked to the door, his footsteps silent on the stone. He opened it, then paused, looking back at me. A solitary, silver-haired girl framed against the giant mocking moon. "My beta will post guards outside this door. They are not there to keep you in. They're there to keep everyone else out." He closed the door with a quiet, solid click. I was alone. I wasn't in a dungeon. The door wasn't locked. I was in a beautiful room, my wound tended, my body safe. I was no longer a captive. But what was I? A prize? Or queen? To find out what happens next and to hear the rest of Eve's story, make sure you subscribe to the channel.